Welcome everybody. This is the session on game development and low resource settings. My name is Mark West. I'm an educational specialist at UNESCO, the lead United Nations agency for education, science, and culture. I'm based at our headquarters in Paris. So joining you from Paris, as you can see, we are working from home, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, and many people are. Face masks are still an obligation, both indoors and outdoors, here in France and in Paris in particular. And we're sort of settling in for this phase 2 of the pandemic. And the schools remain open, and the government has indicated a commitment to trying to keep them open. So the academic year has begun, schools are open, and at universities it's a bit mixed, but many universities are holding some in-person classes, mix of both. But we want to get started. Everybody's familiar with this pandemic and COVID context, but wanted to just quickly have our different presenters today give a quick hello, so you get a sense of what's coming up. So each presenter will take just less than a minute to just say hello, where they're calling in from, what they do, and then we'll get into the 7-minute presentation. So if you could turn on your videos, that'd be great. Okay, and so Karthik, if you wanted to just tell us where you're calling in from and what you'll be presenting. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. So my name is Karthik. I'm calling in from Bangalore, India. So I run a nonprofit called the Sauramandala Foundation, and we work in extremely remote, vulnerable, and disconnected communities within India. So communities that maybe don't have access to roads, that live in difficult terrain, and also in very, very remote settings within India. And I think, so we pretty much work in low resource settings with no access to internet, and that's sort of a norm for the communities that we work with. And I'm going to be touching upon a concept of education relief kits and sort of looking at education as relief. And yeah, look forward to the interaction today.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Karthik, and thank you for joining us from so far away. And then Kerri, if you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about what you'll be speaking about and where you're calling in from. Thanks. Oh, Kerri, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm Kerri Agee. I am the outgoing head of programs for Catholic Relief Services Cambodia on my way to Mali, but I'm calling in from Cambodia or from South Carolina with Kosal, who I believe is in the waiting room for this panel, and we will be discussing our ongoing collaboration with the Ministry of Education on the creation of toys and games that can be adapted to support children with disabilities, and our adaptation to make play more accessible to children and to parents during the time that children are out of school due to COVID-19, and how we are continuing to engage with the entire education community so that when schools start again, children will be ready to make that transition back. And so hopefully Kosal will be able to join us and make the presentation himself in just a moment.
Great. Thanks so much, Kerri. Looking forward to the presentation, whether from you or Kosal. So thank you. Next up is Scott. Scott, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you'll be talking about today and where you're calling in from. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. I'm a game design professor from Wilfrid Laurier University in Brantford, Ontario, Canada. And my focus is escape rooms. I've been looking at escape rooms for about 5 years, and I've been focusing on escape rooms in museums and libraries. And I find that in the classrooms, teachers like the idea of escape rooms, but they don't work out so well bringing an escape room in an escape room format to the classroom. So I'm going to be presenting 4 different game shapes, different ways to take game design ideas from escape rooms and bring them into classrooms to use fewer resources so that you can have something that a whole classroom can play together.
Terrific. Thank you, Scott. Looking forward to that presentation, and always a fan of escape rooms. Excited to see about them in educational context. And finally, Katie, if you could tell us a little bit about what you'll be presenting and where you're calling in from and your organization. Thanks, Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Barnum. I'm calling in from Southern Vermont. I am the Regional Curriculum Specialist on the PlayMatters team with the IRC. So I'll be talking today about the PlayMatters COVID-19 Emergency Response Packets, PlayMatters at Home. And I'll explain more about the PlayMatters Consortium and such when I do my presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Katie. Looking forward to the presentation. So now we're going to enter a phase of our presentation where each speaker will have 7 minutes to sort of share their organization's activities, perspectives, lessons learned on game development for low resource settings. So we're going to start with Karthik from Bangalore, working in poor and remote regions in the subcontinent of Asia. So please go ahead, Karthik. Welcome.
Thanks again, Mark. So like I briefly touched upon before, we work with extremely remote and vulnerable communities in India. And these are typically communities.
Karthik, sorry, do you want to turn on your video? It might be better if we can see you. Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So we work with remote and vulnerable communities in India. Typically communities that live around the Himalayan range, live in extremely vulnerable places that are very prone to floods and the effects of climate change. And one of the reasons why we sort of choose to work in these communities is that they're usually left out of the development cycle. And so this really affects service delivery in communities like this, even in normal times and even pre-COVID times. And complex factors like terrain, just lack of network, and then all of this compounded together makes it very, very difficult for children to be able to get access to education. So sometimes reaching a school is difficult. Sometimes it's very, very difficult for a teacher to even reach the school. They get stuck in between or things like this. So I think access to education itself is a daily norm. It's sort of a challenge for the communities that we work in. And I think one of the things that COVID has now done is it's probably now easier for people all over the world and even in urban settings to sort of understand this. Could be, we work with communities that face school closures due to geopolitical tensions, like Kashmir, for example, because schools have been shut for over a year. And typically what happens in situations like this is that, and even with COVID, is that the schools were the first institutions to close. And they probably have received the least amount of attention after that. So, because everyone's talking about health and everyone's talking about the economy, and they just don't, students in education as such aren't receiving enough attention that they need right now. And especially in India, I think we're getting to a situation where we're going to, maybe 1 year down the line, look back and say, hey, what happened? Why did the learning levels drop so much? And then sort of think about what is the impact this had. So one of the projects that we do with the communities that we work with is to actually work with different artisans and different groups within these communities to create educational toys, because we feel that it's a great way for children to learn. And then that has now just taken up, it has become more important and it's become more relevant during this time where so the first thing that a lot of, say, governments and organizations did post the COVID lockdowns were actually start sending relief material, right? So we look at relief like, say, food or money for these communities to be able to sustain. And we started thinking on the lines of, if these relief materials were being sent to these homes, why can't we also then send education relief material? Like in most of the cases, the organizations working for relief, they do know whom they're providing relief to. They have data about the home. So then we started sort of shortlisting as to, are there children in these homes? What what age group are they, and then started designing these education relief kits, which are basically sort of designed in the form of puzzles, in the form of small toys that children can then use to play with. We sort of looked at broadly age groups of early childhood learning, younger children, and then skills like maybe some cognitive skills, logical thinking, and problem solving, and quickly created these designs, which sort of then were sort of open source out to these artisans in these communities, and they were able to look at that and then create crude versions of this and send it out to the children. So then the idea sort of came about as, if we are able to do this and actually keep the children engaged during this time, we feel that at the end of school closures due to various reasons, could be COVID, could be floods, could be geopolitical tensions, but because we've been able to keep the children engaged during this time, we will also be able to impact and reduce the impact that these lockdowns have on them. So that's sort of the intent with which we started in very remote villages in Northeast India, and then now it's gotten to a point where we're looking at creating a platform where we're reaching out to other organizations who did something similar. Could be worksheets, could be different games that they designed, and sort of put this all together on an open source platform where people can look at these designs, and then maybe someone in any other part of the world or in any other part of India can basically create it in whatever materials are available around them. So it could be 3D printing in one place, it could be probably just clay structures in pottery clay in one place, or it could be cardboard. So the design's been kept very universal. It's very play oriented. It involves a lot of interlocking blocks, puzzles, and games, and completely it does not need technology at all. So I think that's kind of what COVID led us to start, and we feel that by sort of collaborating with the right organizations, we should be able to create a repository of education which can then also be included as relief in times like this. So yeah, that's sort of what we've been doing, and we've just started post COVID. So I guess there is a long way to go, but we feel that this sort of will have a lot of potential in addressing situations like this.
Karthik, really interesting, and thanks for that overview of your important work there in India and in those very marginalized communities being affected by climate change and other hardships there. So, including, of course, the pandemic. So, thanks very much for that. I'm sure we'll have a number of questions about your session. But to keep things moving along, wanted to give the floor to Kerri or her colleague to share information about their work with the Catholic Relief Services. Kerri, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Unfortunately, Kosal is not able to connect as a presenter, so I will present on behalf of both of us. I am attempting to share a PowerPoint right now. And then I hope that Kosal can be available for question and answer. So.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kerri. Are you able to get the slides up?
Can you see a PowerPoint? I'm trying to, I'll share my entire screen and then go straight to the PowerPoint. Are you able to see it? Because I can no longer see our window.
I can't see it.
Let's see, share your entire screen, share. The joy of technology, right? Is it working?
No, it's not. Maybe give it one more try. I think you need to have sort of two permissions. No sweat. I think that you click on sort of share, and then there's another sort of validation of share.
I'm not seeing another validation to share. And it just keeps blocking my share as I try to share. So
Okay.
I click and then I hit share, and then it just goes right back to the box with a line through it. So.
Okay. Well, Kerri, we can either do two things. You can go forward. I see Tony's here. Tony, did you? Kerri's just having a little trouble bringing up her slides.
Hey, Kerri, maybe let's just work on that in the back end. Maybe we can start with the next presenter. But as Mark had said, the little icon at the bottom, it sounds like you're doing that. And then it should open up another window.
Yes.
And then you just have to highlight what you want to share. And then you have to click again. Is that what you're trying?
Yes. And then I click share. And then it takes me back to our main screen with a line through the sharing.
Okay. Well, the other thing that I would say is, Kerri, we'll have our coordinator in the background send the slides. Just send the link to the slides, and then another one, we could try opening it up on another window during your presentation. That would be fine as well. So let's just take that up. Let's drop in the chat the email that you could send it to. And
okay, fantastic. Thanks.
Perseverance. Okay, and Mark, back to you.
My pleasure. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much. And while they're working that out, I suggest, Kerri, we'll come back to you. Looking forward to your presentation. But I suggest we give the floor to Scott, professor of game development, focusing on escape games. So Scott, the floor is yours. Looking forward to learning about your work.
All right, thank you very much. So, hello everyone. Again, I'm Scott Nicholson from Brantford, Ontario, Canada, and I'm going to be talking about escape rooms. A little bit about what I've found. I've been looking at them for about 5 years and have used them in educational settings. And so in case you don't know what an escape room is, the idea is that it's a game where you come in with a team of players and you are locked into a space, and over a limited period of time, usually about an hour, you're going to solve puzzles and challenges to try and unlock all of the secrets in the room. There may be multiple rooms that you find, and the goal is to get out within an hour. When I first saw escape rooms, I was in Singapore in 2014, and I got really excited about them because I saw that as it's a game format that's cooperative, that's about thinking and puzzles, that you're working together, all these teamwork things, but it's popular in the recreational space because as you may know, in recreational gaming, it's typically pretty violent. It's pretty not about working together and solving something together. It's not about thinking so much, but so I was really thrilled to see this form of game become so popular. The reason I liked them as I started to study them is I found that about half the creators of escape rooms were women. And that was really great because the game industry is so male dominated. So that got me excited about escape rooms. Now I'm a former librarian and I've been working in games and libraries for some time. And I saw this opportunity as escape rooms being ways to bring in these sorts of activities into learning environments, into classrooms, into museums, into libraries, and things like that. What you see on the screen are a couple rooms that we've made at our game lab. So on one side is at a military fort in the United States. We made an escape room where all the technology had to be from the 1800s. And the idea was that families would come and they'd play this escape room before visiting the rest of the fort. They would have some ideas of what they were getting ready to see in the fort and to get them excited. On the other side of the screen, what you see is the plans for an escape room we've developed for a dinosaur museum in Alberta, where there is a dig site and a researcher's tent. And so the players are actually doing some dinosaur digging and analyzing bones and finding the secrets that we've hidden within. So they're very good as simulations, but there's some problems when you bring them into a classroom. Escape rooms are designed for small teams. That doesn't work so well when you have a large group of students. Escape rooms require dedicated space, and many classrooms don't have that as an opportunity. They require a block of time, so you have to have half an hour or an hour to just go to the escape room. That doesn't always work so well in a classroom setting, and they require someone to be involved. The escape rooms, one of the parts of the model is someone is there watching you to give you hints, and that's a high resource to try and deal with. Now, there are times I've seen escape rooms work well in school settings. They're good for special events. So if you're running some special events, some extracurricular event, and you have an escape room, that works really well. They've also worked really well as an extracurricular club, the escape room club, where the students make escape rooms after school for other students to play. That can work really well. But for the actual classroom, they don't work so well. So what we want to were other things to do. Now, what you're getting is a sneak preview. There's a book that I've written with Liz Cable that's going to be coming out 2021 on making escape rooms and games for the classroom. So what you're getting here are some of the things that we talk about in this book, some of the things we tackled, because this book is not really about making escape rooms. It's about making escape games. So the idea of an escape game is a game based on escape room design concepts. So we use the concept in the book of game shapes, and I'm going to talk about 4 game shapes in the next few minutes. And so these game shapes are different ways to format escape room concepts into a package that can work better in a classroom that doesn't require as many resources. Puzzle boxes, puzzle hunts, digital escape games, and serial stories. Puzzle boxes. So now puzzle boxes have become popular in the last few years. Breakout EDU is an organization that has really led the charge in creating these puzzle boxes for classrooms. And the idea of Breakout EDU is that it's a platform. So the concept is you get this box, you get a hasp, which holds multiple locks, you get different kinds of locks, and you are able to download from Breakout EDU's website the games. So you download the paper that you put together with the box, and you're able to have the game. What you see on the picture here, the Ballot Box Bumble, was a game I made for the Breakout EDU platform. When I first moved to Canada, I wanted to better understand how the elections were done there because it was different. So I made this game where the box represented a ballot box, and you were going into an office setting. So everything you see there are the things that you print out, and you're uncovering these clues and hints and learning about, as you're doing it, you're learning about election fraud in Canada and figuring out how these elections all work together. And so you can go to the Breakout EDU website. They have some free games there. That is available for free for you to print out and then use with a box and locks and hasps, and you can have that game. And this did bring the concept of escape rooms into classrooms, but the problem is it's still resource heavy. You need to have one of these boxes and locks for every group of 4 to 6 players. So the concept, if you're doing it with an entire class, is you end up with these stacks. My game lab has piles and piles of toolboxes and hasps and locks and all this stuff, because to run it for a big group, you need to have a lot of resources. Now, Breakout EDU came up with a concept called the lock parking lot. And so the way that works is you only need one box and one set of locks that the teacher keeps on their desk. The players work with the paper materials, and then they come up when they have a solution, and they get to try their solution in one of the locks that's on the desk. When they unlock it, then they get whatever next piece of information that they need. They get to move on in the game, but they don't each have their own box. Instead, they're just using one box. So that reduces the amount of resources that you need to use a puzzle box. But there are different ways to use the puzzle boxes that don't require each group to have one. And I've created games that explore these different things. One is where you might have 4 boxes in the corners of the room, and the players are working on challenges at their table. When they've solved a challenge, they take the information to one of the boxes, and each box only has a single lock. They unlock the lock, they get whatever's inside to allow them to continue the game, and then they relock the box for the next group. So that allows you to have many fewer boxes, but still handle a large group of students. Another way to do that is to use stations. So in this concept with stations, you would have areas around the room, and you'd have a game structure that would require every 10 minutes the players to move to the next station. So each station has the puzzle and the box and the lock, and the players have 10 minutes to work through that one challenge or not, and then they move on. And if you do this, you could actually use stations that are go outside and observe something, go to this mini escape room. So you can have a variety of activities using the stations model. These are related to another form called the puzzle hunt. Now, a puzzle hunt is primarily pencil and paper. And the idea of a puzzle hunt is the players will have an envelope with many puzzles within it, and they will work through the puzzles. Now, a puzzle hunt structure typically has it to where 3, 4, 5 puzzles will all fill into one larger meta puzzle. And so the idea is the solvers in their group, they open up the packet, they've got 3, 4, 5 puzzles. They pass those out to different people in the team. Everyone's working on different puzzles, working together. But as they solve the puzzles, they feed them into this meta puzzle. Once they've solved the meta puzzle, it gives them a single code word or an answer. They then take that code word up to the teacher, tell them, okay, the code word is Fred. The teacher then gives them another packet of puzzles that they take back to their desk. Now, there are apps that will also facilitate all of that puzzle hunting stuff, so they don't need a person. But in low resource settings, it works better with just a person. And that person can also then give hints if people are stuck. This scales up really well. You just need to have another packet for each team of people. You don't need all the boxes or all the materials. You could still use environmental elements. So you can say, all right, take your team and go outside and go look for this thing and find this information, or go take pictures of these things like a scavenger hunt or photo safari, or you could make a mini escape room. So puzzle hunts can accommodate these things without needing all the boxes and all of that equipment. The problem with the puzzle hunt is you end up with a giant pile of wasted paper at the end of the day. We ran a puzzle hunt out of my escape room class called Framed in the Past, and this was the box of all the junk that just goes off to the recycle. So it's still pretty wasteful. Digital escape games are another concept. So you can see there's with digital escape games where you use a Google form. That's like the one that we're doing. The digital escape game for the conference is this form right here, where you have a set of forms and questions. There's other tools you could use for digital escape games. PowerPoint will allow you to link elements within certain slides to jump around a presentation. Twine is a free tool that allows you to make something that's more like interactive fiction. And the final model is a serial story model. Rather than have it all happen in an hour, you carve it up into little chunks. So you take any of these models, and instead of doing one big hour where you do everything, you do 10 minutes per week. And you have the students work on one chapter of their games every week. You can change up the story as the weeks goes on, and it's a great platform for having the students make little pieces of the story to plug into the rest of it. So where am I going to go next? Well, I think we can do this with even fewer resources. I think we can do this with just a chalkboard, found objects, and creativity. But that's what I want to look at next. If you want to keep up with what's going on, there's my Twitter, Facebook, and the book's going to come out in early next year.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Really fascinating. Glad to learn about all that. Really great. I'm sorry I couldn't see your slides, but it seemed like most other people could. So good news about that. And I'm sure we'll have some questions from our audience members about your presentation. For those in the audience, please feel free to type questions in the chat. We see some of them coming through. Again, the format is we're going to hear short presentations from our 4 speakers. We've heard from 2. We're going to hear from 2 more, and then we'll have some time for open exchange and conversation. So I wanted to now give the floor to Katie. Katie, if you could tell us a little bit about the work that you and your organization are doing. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, now I've shared my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Great. So as I said in the beginning, my name is Katie Barnum. I'm the Regional Curriculum Specialist with the IRC on their PlayMatters team. PlayMatters is a 5-year project that's looking to improve holistic learning outcomes for refugee and host community children ages 3 to 12 plus in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Tanzania. The project is implemented by a consortium led by the IRC with the Behavioral Insights Team, War Child Holland, Plan International, and Innovations for Poverty Action in partnership with the LEGO Foundation. So at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the PlayMatters team was just in the very early phases of inception when the pandemic forced school closures all around the world. So we quickly pivoted to come up with a family-friendly home learning program to help caregivers engage their children in educational play. Knowing that the ministries of education and other service providers were focused on delivering academic curricula, PlayMatters chose supporting child and caregiver well-being. It became very clear through stories with our own friends and family, as well as our colleagues globally, that the added responsibility of being a full-time educator in addition to a caregiver was quite stressful for many. So we prioritize promoting well-being by mitigating stress and learning loss through play-based methodologies to make reading, math, social emotional activities fun for the whole family. In partnership with Ubongo for the radio program, our intervention centered around 2 packets, which I'm going to speak about today. These packets have been translated into 18 languages. We developed 2, one for primary age children and one for pre-primary. The packets themselves are designed as a game. So as you can see here, the cover is a game board. And just on the inside, there's an illustrated way to show caregivers and children how to engage with these. So by tossing a simple rock, they can then find a corresponding activity marked on the inside. So the packets are caregivers and children can engage with the learning games together, or siblings can do it themselves. They're illustrated and have minimal text to support families with lower literacy rates and to encourage child-led engagement. The packets start with a letter to caregivers and also a suggested daily routine. The routine is designed to lift some of the burden of being an educator an added task for caregivers and instead help them integrate it into their day. And the letter itself sort of helps orient caregivers to the packet and just kind of, helps make sure that they feel like to know that they're not alone. The packets have caregiver tips all throughout. So there's caregiver tips in the beginning, and there's also caregiver tips at the bottom of each page, which I'll show to you. So there's also an illustrated instruction on how to use the packet. The packets focus on reinforcing holistic learning skills. So they focus on reinforcing creative skills, social skills, cognitive, physical, and emotional. And they, as I mentioned earlier, they aim to mitigate learning loss by engaging children in games that reinforce these skills, which are represented by the different icons. And these match what was on the cover. And then also each activity is fixtured with these icons. So each activity is numbered. There's a small description at the bottom that explains how to play the game. And as you can see, it's like a comic in that it's illustrated so that caregivers and children can follow if they can't necessarily read all of the words. There's a repeat symbol to symbolize if an activity can be repeated again with a different leader in the game. So the pre-primary packets have a bit simpler text, as you can see, and the primary packets have a bit more, assuming that children themselves at the primary level might need to practice their literacy skills. So we designed the text so that it was available to help them practice those skills as well. And as you can see at the bottom of each page, there's tips for caregivers on how to take care of themselves, or also how to engage children in some of their daily activities, such as cleaning, telling stories while doing normal household chores, or how to engage children in cooking to help with measuring and practicing counting skills. At the very back of the packets, I'll skip ahead, there's a resource section. There's another caregiver tips section, that enforces breathing, having fun, smiling, trying to make the mood a little bit lighter in the time of a global pandemic. But there's also a resource section. So I have the master copies here, so the resources are blank in this copy. But in the copies that were distributed in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Uganda, these were filled in with relevant information for each context. They were filled in with Ministry of Education radio and TV stations, the Ubongo radio station, which utilized 1 to 2 activities from these packets in each episode. So that was also included where it was broadcasted. Numbers to call for various services, including MHPSS support. War Child Holland created an MHPSS hotline as a part of this. So that was also included. As well as other academic radio stations and teachers and facilitators to speak with. So in addition to these guides, we also created educator packets that we gave to teachers so teachers could reach out to families and check in with them, see how they were using the packets, see if they needed any support. So that's sort of a summary of our packets. And then in our video, one of my colleagues shared a video and demonstrated doing the activity. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much, Katie. That really fascinating, and could see how it worked very clearly through the slides. So thank you for that, and very relevant for these low resource contexts. Appreciate that. We're going to have our final presentation from Kerri to talk about her work. Kerri, I understand that we'll be using the organizers will present your slides. So please, Kerri, the floor is yours.
Great, and thanks to all of you and to Anthony for the tech support at the last moment. So on behalf of my colleague, Siang Kosal, who is on the line and is the current education specialist for CRS Cambodia, Catholic Relief Services Cambodia, as well as the entire Cambodia program, I'm very happy to talk a bit about how we have adapted our ongoing collaboration with the government to promote educational play at home during the time of COVID-19. So next slide, please. Just as a bit of background, the country of Cambodia is still relatively more lightly affected by COVID-19 than a lot of other countries globally. However, schools have been out since March, and they are just now beginning to phase back in. So this has left over 250,000 pre-primary aged students out of school. The ministry has been really proactive in responding developing and delivering a lot of e-learning sessions by YouTube and over the TV. And because Cambodia is still somewhat less affected, principals and teachers are able to do some socially, physically distant follow-up work individually with households. Next slide, please. CRS, prior to COVID-19, has been working with the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders in country over the past several years to develop a few different guidelines, one of which was a manual for educational play, focused on the creation and use of different toys and games created with locally available materials. Some of these can be found in nature as well as plastic paper, but we also did promote environmentally friendly use of leaves and natural glues and things like that. The manual was finished, it was adopted and endorsed for nationwide rollout. And as we were working on our plan for that, COVID-19 happened. So the challenge related to this is that our curriculum online that the ministry has adopted is very, very curriculum focused, not at all play-based, but we recognize the need for play and educational play at that. Next slide, please. So as a quick adaptation, we decided to work with our stakeholders to create and disseminate some videos. And if you click again, you can see a flow, which is how the ministry envisions the rollout going, from the videos themselves to the various sharing platforms, YouTube, TV. The final videos, in addition to the manuals themselves, will be also available for download from the ministry's website. So anyone can access, but their view and the way this was originally envisioned is that teachers and lead parents can then support other parents and children in the communities with learning from the online sessions and then rolling them out in a safe and physically distant manner. Next slide, please. The video creation process has started. In this picture, you can see some of our technical working group members kind of designing and creating the videos. The next slide will show how we are filming them. We have, to the extent possible in our print manuals, focused on using the Cambodian context and Cambodian models, and obviously the videos are filmed with Cambodian school children in Khmer. And the next slide, again, shows the editing process that our technical working group, which is led by the Ministry of Education, has undergone to make sure that these videos are truly useful in this time. So the next slide, please. We'll see a bit to the evidence that we have collected both for the offline version of the toys and games. As I said, this is a process that has taken a few years of creation and research and testing and revision. As a result, we did pilot the print manual, and we found the results that you can see on the slide. It was very well received by teachers, by parents who were keen to adopt these games to play at home. And while we don't have any quantitative data, we do have some feedback from parents and teachers that they have seen improvement in motor and social skills of some children with disabilities who were really the target audience. Over the past few months, as we have started to create videos and the scripts, we did go through a field testing process there to make sure that what we create and what we share is truly useful. So we have learned from teachers and parents that they prefer a video that shows them how to create and how to use and how to play the games. So this is what we have done in order to create a total of 18 videos at this time. Next slide, please. So we've gotten a start, and this work has been done to date with some private funding that CRS has had available. So where we are now and where we hope to go is to really make sure that as these videos are finalized, they are widely shared and widely accessed and used. We recognize that no online solution can replace what is done in person. So we are at a very small scale providing transportation support, of course, hygiene materials to teachers, to, as you saw from the flow, are supporting in the rollout at home. We recognize that equipment such as tablets and projectors may also be useful. Again, these videos are created. They should be low cost to diffuse, but we would definitely love to work with other implementers in Cambodia to make sure this is rolled out more widely, as our footprint is limited right now to only 2 provinces. Next slide, please. So again, we've got a vision for a sustainable and scalable model of parents really engaging in play, both now at home during COVID, but also as students get back into schools, just to really complement the work that is done. You know, our vision is to really equip and support teachers and parents to be community leaders where NGOs can't have a constant presence, so that play is something that is widely adopted. So again, next slide, please. We've got the goal, as I've already mentioned, is just that children are engaged in play so that all children, and particularly those with disabilities in Cambodia, can thrive and reach their full potential. The next slide has Kosal and my contact, and the video that will be available on the website for this event does have some small clips to show you the different aspects of the videos that were created. Unfortunately, they're only in Khmer right now to be accessible to a Cambodian audience, but the print information is both in Khmer and in English and available to all. So yes, Kosal has provided some more information in the chat box, and thank you again to the organizers for the tech support. We look forward to your questions.
Well, thanks very much, Kerri. Really fascinating to learn about your work and the Catholic Relief Services efforts in Cambodia. Really fascinating, fascinating stuff, and the creation of videos and other things. Quite an involved project. We're now going to switch gears to a sort of discussion and question and answer period. So for those of you who may have questions, please type them in the chat. We have had a number of good questions already, and hopefully have time for many of them. So to kind of kick off, I wanted to follow up quickly with a question that was raised for Scott, a few different questions for Scott. But Scott, maybe if you could speak to some of your work kind of looking at digital and non-digital escape rooms, and people asking what is the scope for digital escape rooms, and is that a kind of good direction to move, or is that just a lot of bells and whistles without much benefit? Over to you.
So we've actually seen in the last 6 months the escape room industry as a whole refigure out how they can exist when people can't come together and be locked into a small space to breathe all over each other. And so it's been interesting to watch the very fast exploration of different platforms and different methods, from where one person straps a camera onto themselves and are actually in the physical space and having everyone tell them what to do, to games where each person's sitting at their own computer and exploring their own spaces and they're communicating together, to ones that are completely audio, to say, you've entered a room and there's a giant monster in here, what will you do? To all sorts of different kinds of formats. And I think there's some interesting opportunities there. One thing we did, so we just ran a large scale orientation event for our university. And one of the things we did was a digital escape room. But the way we did it, so if you've played the escape room for the conference, you saw it was a Google form that everyone on the team was supposed to work on together. What we did is we created 3 different Google forms. So the idea that each team member went through and saw different things, and they would be solving different puzzles and having to communicate with each other, because the concept was they were all in different spaces, seeing different things, because we wanted to bring about the feeling of an escape room. But really, you have to take a step back and say, what are our learning outcomes? What are the goals that we're trying to accomplish, and use that to help decide the platform. It's a mistake to start with the platform and say, we're going to lock people up and give them these puzzles. It's like, no, what do you want to do? And then think about what platform is going to allow you to do that most effectively. That's the better approach here.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And that really resonated with me. I mean, beginning with the kind of learning outcomes that you want to achieve, and then sort of backwards designing the games. Thanks for that. Katie, there was a question for you, and thanks for sharing those, the beautiful handbooks that were created for caregivers and those wonderful illustrations. And there was just a question about, understanding that so many parents and caregivers are very low literate, that how you sort of, dealt with that reality. And it's certainly a perpetual one, something we think about constantly at UNESCO. But if you could maybe speak to some of the considerations that went into that, and how your kind of brochure and product was developed with that in mind. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, definitely. So, so of course, the illustration was the biggest driver for our low literacy. So we tried to make it as detailed as we could, but also as simple as we could with the illustrations. The icons were another way in which we tried to make up for low literacy rates, just so that, caregivers could see that there were different icons and there were different skills. The radio program was another way. So because the radio program utilized activities from the packet, it was an audio support to encourage engagement with the packets and to help explain different pieces. And then also the educator packets. So we did a training with educators, and then we also gave them their own packets and worked with them and explained to them what these packets were that families would be receiving. And then we also had them connect with caregivers to ask if they needed any support, if they didn't understand anything of, that was happening in the packets. So we really tried to come at it from multiple angles. But I would definitely say the illustration was the biggest of, straightforward approach that we tried to make in terms of the low literacy.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Just a very quick follow-on question.
Yeah.
And I know
Sure.
this because we do this a lot at UNESCO, but once you print a sort of learning resource, right? You print off thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands. They go out to the field, they get used. Is there anything you would have done differently? Is there a sort of lesson that could be learned or could help all of us that you wish you had known and might do differently now? Over. That's
a really great question, Mark. So because PlayMatters we were just 2 months into inception when COVID-19 hit. So this was, understanding that a lot of organizations and the ministries themselves, sorry, the phone just rang. There's the answering machine. But knowing that they were going to provide audio support, we tried to go for a support that was as low tech as possible. Sorry about that. We tried to, somebody also entered when I was giving my other presentation. Somebody came here. So all the distractions are when I'm not on mute.
Everything under the sun in these meetings. Don't worry about it.
But yeah, so definitely as PlayMatters in principle, we're working to embed learning through play into the systems that are already existing. And we definitely want to find ways to become less resource intense. So as a principle for our project, as we develop and as we move into implementation, we will definitely be looking for other solutions that don't require sort of that one-off handing over of a resource. But given the time and given everything that was happening in all the response, we saw that this was a gap that needed to be filled, that there were a lot of caregivers and families who didn't have access to technology, but a lot of response was focused on technology. So this was our way within our own systems and within our own organizations to fill a gap that our educational technical unit wasn't filling and that other stakeholders and actors weren't filling. So that was part of why we chose that response. But definitely going forward, we're looking for, as much of a sustainable approach as we can.
Great, thanks very much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Karthik, wanted to come with a quick question to you and just to sort of capture this. There's sort of a narrative, a discourse in the education community that, that some of these even hard to reach remote communities, fragile communities, that there is a potential to sort of leapfrog with development and education and maybe move straight to digital models of education, recognizing that this sort of, arguably Western model of education with schools and, heavy resources, teachers and classrooms and cohorts of students, just the evidence didn't work everywhere in the world, despite this model kind of being in existence for so long. And so we often hear that maybe there is scope for these communities to just sort of jump into something new, something different, something that fits for them, even recognizing, of course, the myriad connectivity challenges and everything. But given that you're there, you're working on the ground, you mentioned in Northeast India and other places, how do you respond to that? Is that a way forward? Does that make sense, or does it make more sense to sort of go in this more progressive level that we've seen in other parts of the world? I realize that's quite a sweeping question, but wanted your reactions. Thanks.
Right. So I think. Sorry, there's some sort of an echo.
It sounds good on this end.
Okay. So I think one of the things is that, of course, technology has changed a lot of things. There is this potential to democratize knowledge and make things more accessible. But there is also an equal importance that a lot of the content or the way education happens, it sort of cannot just be something that is not designed from within these communities. And so technology is fine as an enabler. Yes, it helps reach more people. It makes things a lot. Of course, it has a lot of its advantages, but then there is also a need to sort of look at education being very contextual, relevant, and even something say introducing play in education to sort of look at the context from where the children come from, what's around them, and keep things really, really relevant. So I kind of agree that we do have this potential opportunity to leapfrog and learn from a lot of things that maybe have been tried for a really long time and have not shown the result. And especially in a country like India, where we're still grappling with things like, say, lower learning outcomes and things like that. So it definitely opens up a lot of space to try new things, to bring in technology. And so, I mean, one of the things we've started doing is to sort of really concentrate on, say, content in native dialects, that so that of course technology can play a role over here in terms of taking content that's already maybe available, making it more accessible. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So of course that also sort of translates to a very, very big opportunity. Yes.
Hey, Mark, I don't think we can hear you.
Tony, sorry for that. No, Karthik, thank you for the reflections on the question. Kerri, I wanted to ask you a quick question about, in Cambodia, the teachers' receptivity to using kind of game-based learning approaches. At UNESCO, we have certainly seen in some contexts a bit of a resistance to learning that is game-based, gamified learning, that's not sort of very serious. It may not be very rigorous. It's not what they're tasked to do. And was just wondering if that was something you saw, and if so, maybe how you dealt with it, or if it wasn't something you saw, maybe how you you laid the right foundations. Over to you, Kerri.
Sure, thank you for that. Again, a really good question. When this process started for the games, it was actually through a lens of supporting children with disabilities, and it was also designed in conjunction with some screening guidelines to identify children with disabilities at the pre-primary school level. So what we had initially envisioned was to create toys and games targeting that younger age, the pre-primary level, so that teachers can use the games at school as educational games. They can be used as toys and games at home. And then some, but not all, are designed so that they can transition with the child from pre-primary into those early years of primary school, and adapted in the classroom setting so that it's less of a game and maybe more of a teaching aid, for example, for counting. So again, these were designed in a very collaborative manner, and we did not get that pushback in the Cambodia context. But again, the initial focus was that very young age where play was really education, and then just adapting and helping the child grow and transition with that. I think you might still be muted, Mark.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. Thank you, Kerri. Interesting to learn about that reception in Cambodia. Katie, a quick follow-on question for you about the sort of different games that were offered in this. Sort of gave caregivers a little bit of a choice. They had different options to choose from. I was wondering, how do you, or are you able to get any feedback on kind of what's working? Everybody has a favorite game, right? And one that's the kind of go-to one, and it really resonates with kids for some reason. And I was just wondering if you had any way of getting information on that, how you use that information, and any ideas why one game is sort of more attractive or gets better reception from the kids and parents and caregivers. Over to you.
Sure. So when we created the packets, we actually did, because we have the Behavioral Insights team as a partner on our consortium, we did do an initial behavioral research with what we had with the draft of our packets. So we were able to do just sort of a rapid behavioral test with some of our staff members and also some, caregivers in their community. So we got some initial feedback from them, and the initial feedback showed that a lot of the games were familiar, because it was a very collaborative process to create the packets, and so a lot of the games were familiar, were recognized, and they could really relate to the games that were in the packets. In terms of now that we've distributed, we're finishing distribution in Ethiopia. Uganda and Tanzania are about to start. So now we're starting to get our post-distribution monitoring system set up, and we will gather more information soon about how they've actually been received by all of the families. So we don't have that information yet, but our initial testing showed that it all seemed like fun so far. So I'll get back to you on that one, Mark.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And then I think we'll only have time for about one more question, but maybe direct this question to Scott. Again, Scott, this is maybe a very sort of UNESCO question, but UNESCO thinking about, differences in cultures and countries and communities. I wanted to kind of get your sense of how culturally specific are games? And then I had a very pointed question about escape games, which is, where do escape games come from? How did these things get going and take off? Was this, what are the kind of origins of escape games? And are games such that they just have a sort of human appeal? Doesn't matter where we are or where we're from. I'm thinking of a game like chess, which is, kind of been picked up around the world. A lot of people enjoy it. It's a very old game. But many games that are sort of very, country, community focused. I'm thinking maybe, backgammon you see all over the Middle East, but not very often outside of that. Anyway, your thoughts and reflections on that, and I definitely want to know where escape games come from. Over to you.
Well, in over this semester's class, I'll be teaching you about big questions, but there's an article for that. So in Analog Game Studies, I wrote an article about the different precursors to escape games, and I'll actually link that in the chat. I'm calling it up right now. I'll put that in the chat right now. And what I looked at here was the 6 different areas that escape games came from, because a lot of people point to this one escape room that was in Japan and say, yeah, that's the first one that did it. But I point much further back than that. Escape games come out of reality TV shows. They come out of adventure movies. They come out of scavenger hunts. They come out of puzzle hunts. They come out of these spaces. They come out of text adventures. Actually, that's what I'd like to point to. The old Zork. Those concepts are escape rooms that became point-and-click adventures, that became 3D adventures. Where they grew in popularity in 2005, 2010 was Flash-based escape games. So there's quite a few of those online that you can explore. The cultural question, funny you should mention that. Red Bull funded us to hire someone for 2 years to do research on cultural bias in escape rooms. So Red Bull ran the Escape Room World Championships, and we designed those for Red Bull in 2017 and 2019. And we found we made mistakes the first time. We created puzzles that were culturally biased. So some of the competitors were not able to compete as well as others. So we brought someone on board, a researcher who studies this, and we are just finishing up our third article and our third video talking about how to design culturally aware escape rooms, how to reduce the amount of cultural bias in escape rooms. So we've been identifying that as an issue and really studying it. So you're going to see, we got some results out there. If you go to bgnlab.ca, that's my research lab, that is where we're putting these results and the talks and the studies, but we're just finishing up the last big project on. The last one we're doing is looking at online escape rooms, because the interesting now when I can play an escape room that is being hosted in Amsterdam, which I did last week. Now that creates all sorts of new cultural questions. When I'm not physically in Amsterdam and the people there don't necessarily know where I'm coming from, and it could be my team's made up of people from different cultural backgrounds, what impact does that have? And so we've got design guides, how to identify areas in your escape room that could be creating cultural bias in the development. But that's why my focus moving forward, and we've been working with the Education Alliance to explore what this looks like, is how do you create the toolkits for educators to make their own games for their classrooms? Because I can't make a game for all the classrooms out there because of the cultural bias issues, but I can create tools that will help you to make those games. And so that's my goal, is to help educators and more excitedly to help the students themselves make games for each other. That's where this gets really neat. When you teach the students something and then you have as the assignment, now you're going to make an escape game for each other, trying to make a game that other people can solve in exactly 20 minutes. That's where the puzzle gets interesting, because it's easy to make something really hard and it's easy to make something really easy, but it's really hard to make something that someone can play in a certain amount of time. And that's the challenge you have for your students, is make games for each other. But that's just not escape games. That's any kind of games. Game design is where you really get to use games, and that's where the power comes from, in empowering your learners to make the games for each other.
Well, thanks a lot, Scott. And it's a fascinating concept, that idea of, kind of cultural bias inside of games. We hear about that a lot with standardized tests and other things. But of course, there's biases in games as well, and fascinating work. And looking forward to looking at some of those links that you mentioned and shared. We're very short on time, but I'd like to do one final tour de table, and just, I'm sorry, I'm putting our speakers on the spot, but if you could just share one nugget of wisdom about building games for low resource settings. I ask that you keep it to sort of no more than about 30 seconds, but just can be something very, very specific and small that you've learned, but our audience has joined us to learn about low resource, games for low resource settings, and just sort of one final word of wisdom or lesson to pass on with just about 30 seconds. I'm going to go in the order of our speakers. So, Karthik, you have this unenviable task of 30 seconds, a sort of lesson for our audience. Over to you.
So I think it's probably been that, you do not need technology to sort of come up with games. We've been able to come up with games out of bamboo, which have been insane fun, even for us grown-ups to play with. So I think that's sort of something that we've learned, and we'll probably definitely take forward. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Karthik. We don't need technology. Thank you. And now over to Kerri. Over to you.
Sure, I guess with Karthik. While we're looking for a tech-based solution in the time of COVID-19, our original vision was as simple and as close to home as possible, and keeping it green in addition to locally produced. There's no need to go out and buy construction paper when you've got different colored leaves and things like that. And we actually did see that firsthand, and it's really exciting and really empowers people to know that they can play also without digging into their pockets.
That's over. Great. And Scott, you're going to have to keep the paper waste down. You heard it from Kerri. Scott, your reflection there?
Yeah, and even moving away from paper, we are really good at creating things in our minds. We rely so much on screens and so much on paper and products, but we're good storytellers as well. And let's use storytelling, and not only us telling you the stories, but get you to tell us stories. Games are designed experiences, and those experiences come from storytelling. So get your students to tell stories and make games out of those stories.
Thanks a lot for that, Scott. And Katie, final words of wisdom for people in the audience.
Yeah, sure. Definitely think simple, which has already been said. But another thing is to create games that are open-ended. So a lot of the games that we tried to create were games that children themselves could modify and make their own. And we sort of left questions and, suggestions for how can you change this a little bit? So to give the player the power to make the game their own.
Great. Thank you, and thanks to all the audience members for joining this virtual session. I've been coming to the M Education Alliance since, I think it was 2012 or 13 was the first one where I was at. So it was really looking forward to seeing people in person for the 10th anniversary event. But unfortunately, this pandemic has forced a different solution. But I've been really impressed at the sessions and everything, and this community moving online. And this community can't make a virtual environment work for learning, then nobody can. So anyway, been pleased to see all that, and thanks for everybody for the patience with all the hiccups moving to digital environments. But thought it was a really rich session, and again, thanks very much to our four speakers for sharing their experiences and insights.